Part of this is the title of the panel was Realities of Diversity. And when we think about realities of diversity, I wanted to focus on some of these realities that are internal to our schools and to our program. And so when we think about diversity success, oftentimes we're thinking about external issues, who's in the pipeline, what types of support are out there, and all those things. And those are very important things. But we also need to focus internally and look at our own organizational culture and values related to diversity, leadership, which I think is a very important point that I'd like to pick up on that Sheldon made from the earlier panel. Experiences of our students and alumni. Are they champions of our program, or are they running out screaming saying, oh my God, somehow I survived, but wouldn't want to do that again. And then I think this can lead to an improvement in some of the measures that we want to see in terms of numbers of students and of faculty. So when we think about programmatic culture, and all, of course, organizations have programmatic culture, and I should say two things, caveat. I'm not an economist either. My background is in public administration, so I'm always thinking about organizational issues. And the other thing on the public policy side, I do a lot of implementation research. So I'm thinking about the implementation of sort of culture and climate inclusiveness. So that's the orientation that I bring. And I think when it comes to diversity issues, it's important to think globally, but it's also important to act locally. And when we act locally, we have to think about what our own program, what messages our own programs give. So I'd like to do two things. First, I'd like to deconstruct the diversity narrative that I oftentimes come across in departments. And then also, I would like to think about what a better internal narrative might be. So if we look at the diversity narrative, there's sort of three tenets that oftentimes we hear. The first one is that there's a lack of diversity support either from the dean, from the university, from a funder, from some external group. And so that's sort of part of the narrative. I would say that's tenet number one. And that's problematic because, of course, then if we can blame someone else, we don't have to look internally at our own program because it was the funder's fault, it's the dean's fault, it's the university's fault. They don't have money, they don't have this. The second is that students or faculty will not come to, and then you fill in the blank. They're not interested in coming to Tampa, or they're not interested in coming to Omaha, or they're not interested in coming to Washington. This is a very important narrative that, again, relieves the institution of any responsibility because absent moving the institution from place A to place B, the institution bears no responsibility. We want to do better, but we're located in wherever, Chicago, Minneapolis. This is also part of a diversity narrative that's problematic because, again, it puts the problem outside of the university and outside of anything that can realistically be accomplished. The third is that we just can't find them, whoever they are. The students, the faculty, we've looked, but we can't find them. And I think this picks up a lot on Sam's point from the earlier panel. Sometimes we can't find them because we're only looking in the same places. And so, again, but that relieves us of any responsibility because we've looked. We've looked in the four places we typically look, and they're not there. We've done our job. So I want to focus on sort of routine program actions that can support diversity and inclusion. I think we need to do a structural analysis, to borrow some language from John Powell, to look at what do we do within our own institutions, what are the things that we have control over, that perhaps if we did an assessment of, there's room for improvement. I'll also say it's easier. It's uncomfortable to look at ourselves. It's very easy to look externally, but it's uncomfortable, and it may make us nervous and uncomfortable to look at ourselves in our own programs. So I passed around a sheet that I developed and I adapted. This is table 1 here, and this is performing a cultural audit. And the idea is that this is a practical mechanism that programs can use to begin to get a sense of where they are in terms of their overall culture and climate relative to diversity and inclusion. Now, how this audit works is that we've got 9 categories. We have some examples, and these are all just examples of things to look for. The blank sheet on the column on the far right are gaps that exist, and then under there are specific climate actions to be taken over a specified time frame, over 6 months, over a year's time. So the idea is that you're routinely measuring and examining your program in terms of diversity. Now, this does require deliberate thought, and it also requires a willingness to change and to do things differently. Now, and then after that has happened, you can look at your outcomes and evaluate your outcomes to see if marginal progress has been made, significant progress has been made, nothing has happened, whatever the case may be. So the first is looking at physical characteristics in the general environment. Our physical characteristics say something about how we value diversity. Now, you look at some of these examples, and I would say by and large, some things programs by and far, if we compare to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, there's been improvement on. The program website, the brochure, annual reports, most programs have figured out a way to make sure that diversity is displayed in there. So I think we can give ourselves some points there. I'm not so sure, though, if we look at wall hangings, what's in our conference rooms? What photos are there within the building? What messages do they convey? One excellent example of this, I think, is at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and their Institute of Government, where if you go there and you go by their cafeteria, there's a mural there that has the sit-in from student sit-in in Greensboro. That mural speaks volumes. It says the Institute of Government values diversity, values equity, and sees this as germane to the Institute of Government's work. So what are the symbols that your program displays, not just in those annual reports and brochures, but internal to the organization, in the conference rooms, and in the public sites? The second is policies and procedures. And so thinking about what our policies and procedures say about the importance of diversity. How we include or do not include diversity in our mission statement. How it's addressed in our programmatic guide and material. Is it something that is discussed prominently? Also looking at our search and admission procedures on both the faculty and the student side. I've had the experience of serving on nearly 50 search committees. And I've seen almost everything happen on a search committee. And so how records get interpreted, how gaps get explained, how it is just amazing sometimes. And so those are all ingrained in policies and procedures and norms that we have. Same thing when evaluating records for promotion and tenure. Served on my fair share of those as well. And I agree that it's great to have someone on the committee, to have diversity on those committees. But even absent diversity on those committees, these need to be things that are ingrained in policies. And that when we all get the charge, the charge when the dean or someone from the provost office comes in and gives us the charge, we understand then what is the institution's commitment to diversity? Is it sort of, this is something to be taken seriously, or is it more of a formality? The third area, and I think this is perhaps one of the most important, is customs and norms. And that is, what are the norms and customs of our program, and what do we communicate about diversity regarding to that? I won't go through each of these, but I'll just highlight a couple. So faculty-to-faculty interactions. How are minority faculty treated within the department? How are they perceived? What messages do students receive about the value of minority faculty within a particular program? What are some of the unspoken rules and norms? And then I think this last bullet is a particularly important one, and that's the distribution of important student opportunities. Faculty members make decisions routinely about who they extend opportunities to co-author, who they hire to be a part of their sponsored research projects and grants. What does that look like in terms of diversity? If we were to do an analysis over the years of how that process takes place and the outcomes there, what would our program's records show in terms of diversity in those important assignments? The same thing for assisting on journals. So there are very important assignments that happen, and is diversity considered at all? The fourth is in the area of curriculum, thinking about how issues of diversity are included or treated within our curriculum. Do we have required courses? I know Sam did a great lecture when he was president, looking at the extent to which racial equity analysis was part of policy analysis and articles that were published in JPAM. What do we do in the education area relative to diversity? Are these elective set-aside courses? Are these standalone required courses? Again, we send diversity messages about those decisions. Fifth is in the area of research. And that is, how is diversity research related to race, gender, sexual orientation, how is that valued in faculty research and scholarship? Is it valued as a marginal on the fringe activity, Or is it accepted as a robust area of scholarship that is respected and that we encourage folks to participate in? What is the support and advisement opportunities for students who do diversity-related theses or dissertations? And I think this is, I want to pause just a second to say, I think this is particularly troublesome for minority faculty. I've talked to several junior faculty who say, yeah, I'm interested in these topics, but I'm a little nervous about heading that direction because then what happens in P&T time? And so the idea is I'll get tenure first and then I'll return to those. And I think, the sort of the conspiracy theorist in me says, but the problem is after that, once you've decided that research niche, you probably won't go back to that area because now you've gone down another road. And so over the long term, we even see that if we don't increase the appreciation for diversity scholarship, we're not going to learn about underrepresented groups in research in the ways that we need to. And so I think we really have to be careful about the messaging that we give there. And so what does our program say about that? The sixth is an area that Sheldon mentioned, and that is leadership in particular. So at the director or the deanship level, what priority is diversity given? And how are these messages communicated? We know that there are a lot of leadership opportunities here in terms of thinking about how diversity goals are articulated within the entire unit among faculty, staff, and students. Looking at does the department routinely disseminate data on diversity? Is that data accessible? We see, and this was mentioned earlier, that leadership, if we go back and look historically, the leadership of MIT and the economics program, that was largely a leadership issue that created a lot of the African American economists that we benefit today from their tremendous research, such as Sandy Garrity and Sam Myers and others. 7, we look at rewards and recognition. How are departmental diversity accomplishments rewarded? How is that ingrained in part of the culture? Does the department, does the unit provide diversity rewards? If so, what types of diversity rewards are there? What process is used to look at diversity in terms of faculty and staff performance reviews? Is there formal or informal recognition of diversity efforts? So folks who do this work, are they viewed as sort of fringe faculty or thought leaders within the program? 8 is the area of communication, and that is how do we communicate messages regarding diversity, both formally and informally? Do faculty members with an S, not just 1 or 2, speak up on the importance of diversity? And I think a couple of areas there, every program has a diversity narrative. Is your program's diversity narrative readily accessible? Could I go to your website and see, okay, this is the first African American student who graduated from your program, or this is when your program became part of a safe zone, making it safe for making a statement publicly that you're open to all students. Every program has a diversity narrative. That diversity narrative should be on the website. Again, it sends a message about the program's value and an important part of the program's history. And then finally, area number 9 deals with measurement and accountability. All programs are going to have a reputation in terms of diversity. Part of that is going to be through performance measures and how those measures are assessed and evaluated. And so, does the program do routine climate survey assessments of faculty, staff, and students, collect that data? And then also budgetary discretion. I think that's a very important area. If we look at each program always has discretionary budgetary dollars and main budgetary dollars. To what extent are those resources used in the area of diversity? So these are just a few thoughts, I think, to bring the conversation a little bit more internal about some of the things that we have control over within our programs. So finally, I would conclude with saying that examining internal programmatic norms and behaviors is important. Programs can do a lot internally to promote diversity, and I challenge us all to think about how much our program currently does. Thank you.